Having introduced the team, let me quickly state why we are here. Can I get a copy of that report? Not just one now. Circulate to. This is the business that brings us here today. We are here to summarily present this policy brief to you, which is on protecting women and the girl child from violence. It's a small documentation which talks about the introduction and the rationale for why we are doing what we are doing. It looks at what the international community defines as violence against women on the basis of standards which have been ratified by the federal government of Nigeria. It looks at what those standards demand, what they're asking Adama State to do. And then we look at the facts and figures that came from a study we did on the state of education, early marriage and teenage motherhood, maternal mortality, and access to reproductive health and rights in Adama State. And then we talk about the next steps and what we are expecting to be done through the coordination of the State House of Assembly and His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Adama State. So briefly, we hold it as our view that any society, okay, is as strong, or a chain is as strong as its weakest links. And how people in any society treat their most vulnerable people is a reflection of the development and civilization of that society. And today in Nigeria, nobody can doubt from the east to the west to the north that women are generally identified as vulnerable and marginalized members of the Nigerian society. And this is based on a number of things encapsulated as gender, which is about customs, culture, religion, and the policies and laws of any given set of people. However, things around customs and culture and tradition, they are dynamic. They are not static. Over a period of time, they evolve and they can change as society is impacted by new influences. And of course, there's no way we can discuss violence against women or freeing women, allowing them to fully exercise their human rights without talking about the law. Because the law is the foundation of society. It is based on the law that you can claim a right, or you can say this is my entitlement, or you can say someone owes you a duty. So the law needs to come up with what is the demand of modern times. And we started this point from taking a cue from Section 34 of the Constitution, which talks about the right of every Nigerian to human dignity. And this human dignity should include freedom from violence against women and girls, gender-based violence, and the enjoyment of their sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as protection from harmful practices. A lot of definitions have been given to violence against women, starting from issues around the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which identifies it as an obstacle to women's development. And we take it up from there to say that violence against women predisposes them to a lot of challenges, resulting in poor access and control over resources, even issues around education, lack of inheritance rights, lack of voice and minimal participation in decision making. So at the end of the day, you find a situation where this violence, it could be economic, it could be structural, it could be physical, because once we say violence, people's mind get back to somebody being beaten up. It may not necessarily be physical violence. It could be psychological violence, it could be economic violence, it could also be structural violence. And Nigeria has put pen to paper by saying we are part of the international community which says this violence against women is bad. Therefore, all the states of the Federation of Nigeria are expected to amend their laws or enact new ones that will bring it in conformity with the standards we've gone to the world, to the African Union, to the United Nations to say this is what we are going to do. Now, if you look at the issue of how violence against the girl child and women have been articulated, you have the United Nations Declaration on the elimination of all forms of violence against women. It talks about physical, sexual, psychological harm, which will result to suffering to women, including traits of such as coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty. Okay? So it is not just a physical alone. There's sexual, there's psychological, there's emotional violence, there's even verbal violence. Apart from this, we have the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa, which we call the Maputo Protocol. It also defines it, and Nigeria is a party to this protocol. Nigeria is also a party to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which talks about discrimination as the foundation of violence, and it talks about the need to treat people who are all human beings equally and allow everyone to be able to enjoy his rights as creatures of God. So with that, we ask ourselves, what are these standards demanding? What is the demand that is placed on the table when we are asking for VAWG? Part of it is that if we are able to implement these demands, like the Sustainable Development Goals 5, it says, eradicate all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. Eliminate all forms of violence. And this violence includes the ones in public sphere and the ones in private sphere, trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation, harmful practices including child, alien or forced marriage, female genital mutilation, happily is not such a problem at all, universal access to sexual and reproductive rights. So these things are what is being expected. And this is being expected from the understanding that you cannot separate human rights and fundamental freedom. So you can't say, oh, you can go to school, but you suffer violence. You cannot say you want to fight violence without acting with education and health, because that violence will eventually impact education and health, and whether that person will be able to get skills, to get employed, or to earn a livelihood when the person grows up. So, at the background of that, we reviewed the study on page 5 that we did in Adama State. And it says that Adama State records high levels of sexual and gender-based violence and violence against women and girls. And this includes survival sex, exploitation for accommodation, intimate partner violence, rape, sexual assault, and incest. We noted that the enrollment and completion rate for primary, junior, and secondary schools, as well as tertiary institutions in Adamawa, is below what obtains in other parts of Nigeria. Like in most states of the Federation, there are instances of physical, sexual, and domestic violence, and they've been reported. Early marriage and teenage motherhood is another major challenge in Adamawa. The multiple indicator cluster survey indicates that this practice is also high in Adamawa, and it deprives the girl child of access to basic education, as well as in continuing education to higher levels, reducing her opportunity to acquire life skills that will open up economic opportunities, as well as improve her health and that of her children, accentuating poverty and deprivation. We know that there are gaps in the proportion of women who are able to access antenatal care services from skilled health providers in Adama State over the last couple of years, as well as women delivered by skilled birth attendants and at health facilities. So these gaps indicate that there's opportunity to improve maternal and child health, as well as opportunities to reduce child and maternal mortality. And we noted that maternal mortality is a very strong indicator because we are discussing life and death, not just even ordinary violence. And the maternal mortality rate of 848 per 100,000 live births in Adamawa is above the national average of 576 per 100,000 live births. So what do we do going forward? Looking at physical, economic, and structural violence and the indicators we set out here, it has therefore become imperative for the states to take action to curtail issues of violence against women and girls.